Hello and welcome to EV Car Share. So another episode. This time I want to talk about tax. It seems to be something that is quite a lot in the news, both in the mainstream news and also in social media and all that sort of motoring news as well. So particularly car tax. Anybody who doesn't know about the car tax in the UK, maybe you're from overseas, maybe you don't drive, but you just happen to be watching for some reason, or maybe you just don't understand it. Just let me quickly go through what we have in the UK. So every car on the road needs to be taxed. It's part of the rules. And you get a tax period for a year, and you can also get a 6-month period, but most people will probably do the year. And the cars are taxed from the first time they are registered. So not everyone's car is renewed, not everyone's car tax is renewed at the same time. I'm also referring to it here as a car tax because that is what it is effectively. People often refer to it as road tax. They use this term, you see it all over social media, this road tax. It's not a road tax, it's a car tax. You are being taxed because of your car and in regard to your car, and none of that money goes directly, is not ring fenced for roads or anything like that. So if you pay more car tax, you don't get better roads. If you pay less car tax, you don't get worse roads necessarily. The tax just goes straight into the government income, and then the government spends it on what it spends tax on in general. Maybe the military, maybe pensions, maybe healthcare, maybe social care, maybe roads. So maybe some does go to the roads, maybe border forces and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. So think of it as a car tax. You're being taxed for the privilege of owning a car, not as a road tax, because that's just not what it is. That's the first thing I wanted to say really. Now, as I mentioned, it gets renewed every year and it gets paid for the first time you register your car. So I registered this car in December. Originally, that's when I bought the car. And it's when the car is registered, not when you register your car. If you are a second-hand buyer, if you bought a used car, then the car will have been taxed when it was first registered. It may not be when you bought the car. So yeah, the tax won't necessarily line up when you bought the car, if it's second-hand. Also, if the tax has been renewed early at some point during its life, the car's life, or if the car hasn't been taxed for a period at any point, then you will be out of sync with the date of original registration. So that doesn't always apply. Now, my car I taxed early last year, so it gets taxed in December, and then I taxed it early around February time last year. I'll tell you a bit more about that why a bit later, but I did. So it happens that my car now lines up with my wife's car. So in our family we have two cars. We have this Kia EV6, which is our first electric vehicle. That's partly why I'm doing this channel, is to show my experience of my first electric vehicle and experience of owning an electric vehicle for the first time. And my wife's car is a Suzuki Swift. It's a 1 litre petrol, so a small run around for around town. This EV is our main car for long distances, big journeys, all the usual stuff that you would expect to buy an EV for after all. Why buy a car that's cheap on fuel and then use it for very few miles? You want to use it for the most miles, don't you? That makes the most sense. That's where you're going to get your most money savings. So we had come through the post 2 of these letters from the DVLA. So they are the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency. Agency, I always forget agency. If I didn't have letters, I'd have been saying authority or association or something like that, but agency is the one. So there's one from my car and one from my wife's car. So let's have a look. My wife's car, first of all, so we're talking a 1 litre Suzuki Swift petrol, and we have payment options on here. So you can buy 6 months or 12 months, and you can also buy via direct debit if you want to instead. And it looks like a one-off payment of 12 months is £190. So let's get that in there. Let's see, £190. So that is what at the moment is referred to as kind of the standard rate of car tax. So most standard cars would be paying that fee. There are then higher prices for other more substantial cars, let's say, more polluting cars, more expensive cars. There's various different possibilities of additional payments to that £190. But £190 is kind of the baseline price. Now there are some cars which are now older, which are now used cars, that had a lower rate in the past, and they've been given that rate as, like, I don't know, you might call it a grandfather decision. It's like a decision that was made at some time back, some years back, and that's being retained. So you may find that there are some cars, some diesel cars, some other cars that at the time were low emissions, which are now still paying like a £20 rate or something like that. There is also, for the time being, still an exemption for electric vehicle. So you will see now that if I show you my one from my car, we have one choice on the list of payment options, and that is to pay nil. So nil meaning nothing, meaning zilch, meaning zero, meaning nothing at all. So that's what I will be paying. My wife will be paying £190 and I will be paying nothing. That will change. So once we pass April, once we come into April this year, then next time my car comes to become taxed, it will then be paying the standard rate. And I believe the standard rate is going up. So the standard rate is going up from £190 that you've just seen to £195, as I understand it. It's a bit difficult online to get that information. I think until we pass into April, it's not actually fully official, but that's the plan of the government as far as I'm aware. So that's one thing, the standard rate will be going up. Other thing, once we go past April, I will be paying the standard rate for my EV, same as my wife pays the standard rate for her petrol car. Is that a problem to me? No, not really. I haven't bought an EV just for tax money savings. I do most of my money saving in this car relating to the fuel. It's the fact that I can charge it overnight on my low price energy tariff, and the fact that I can get free energy from my solar panels and on my house, and things like that, that mean that I make massive savings on having this car. And I think, I haven't done the calculations, but I'm pretty sure I've pretty much covered the gap between had I bought an equivalent petrol and buying this EV. So that extra price that I had to pay to get an EV, I'm fairly sure I've paid that off now in the amount of fuel that I've saved. I'm now at 55,590 miles, so over 50,000 miles. If I do 50,000 times, I've probably saved around 15 pence per mile. If I do 50,000 times 15 pence, then I would get to a value approximately of what I've saved in having an EV over having petrol. And there is no plans to change the price of home charging up to anything like the price of petrol or diesel at this time. And although I do some long journeys and I do need to charge this car when I'm out and about, I don't do it often enough. It's not my routine charging, so I don't do it often enough to find that to be a big cost and expense. So that's really the plan going forward. Now, I was saying I paid for my tax out of sync last year. It was last year. I don't know if I mentioned last year. Why did I do that, and how is that possible, and so on? Well, last year I heard about this new tax change and decided that rather than paying my tax at December, it'd be better if I paid my tax around at this sort of time before the new tax year, so that when the new charge came in, I would be paying for my new tax at zero cost just before the change, so I'd get a full 12 months ahead. Now, to do that, really, I should have been re-taxing my car in March, which I can still do. So I can tax my car now in February, for zero, and then in 20 days time or something I can go back on the website and I could tax my car again in March for again zero and get an extra month if I choose to, which I probably will do. It won't take very long, it'll just be a thing on the computer that I do, and that would get me an extra month. But from previously, from December, that would have been December, January, February, March, April, I don't know, four months maybe of extra tax I've gained. So 414 is not huge, but if your tax was due in April this year, then it would be very, very good for you to tax it in March rather than April. Then you get a whole year pretty much of extra time at the free level. Now, you may have also heard in the news, if you've been listening to the news and reading social media and so on, about the supplementary expensive car tax, expensive car supplement. That's the official one, expensive car supplement. Although if you've been reading the news and social media and stuff, you'll have heard it being called the luxury car tax, because that's what the press seem to want to call it. So we'll call it luxury car tax. We can call it the expensive car supplement if you prefer. So this is an additional level of tax that's levied on any car that costs more than £40,000 at the time it was initially purchased. So it's RRP, it's retail price on the market at the time when it was initially purchased, and that's 40,000 RRP. So it doesn't matter what discount you got on what deal you did with your dealer, that's irrelevant. They're looking at the actual RRP, and that includes any optional extras you had fitted. And so this applies, as I say, to all cars, except that previously, up until this coming April, it did not apply to electric cars. Because electric cars were that bit more expensive than the petrol counterparts, it was decided that they should be given a bit of leeway on this. They should be allowed off. It's like, yep, okay, fine, you get away with it. Also, this tax is only applied to the first 5 years of taxing that car. So once you've taxed the car 4 or 5 years after that, or once the car has been taxed, not necessarily you, once the car has been taxed 4 or 5 years of its tax life, then that supplement is taken away. It's no longer considered a luxury car, because now it's an old kind of second-hand used car. Kind of makes a bit of sense. So that extra tax is an additional £410. So it took the 190 up to 600. So that'll be being paid by drivers of expensive cars like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and also a lot of the kind of Mercedes and Land Rovers and all these sorts of cars. Some of those will have probably a higher band for the CO2 emissions anyway. So with high CO2 emissions plus the luxury car tax on top, they're probably paying thousands, unlike the rest of us, which in my opinion is fine. That's not a problem. I'm all for taxing the rich more than the poor. After all, they are the rich. And some of them came by those riches by inheritance or whatever. So it's not really their own money. They didn't work for it, did they? Obviously, we can all have different opinions on that. So the press has spoken a lot recently about EVs now no longer being exempt of this luxury car tax, this expensive supplement. However, those that were bought in years gone past, they are still going to be exempt of this luxury car tax, this expensive supplement. It's only the ones that are new, that are going to be bought in the new period, that are going to be subject to this tax. I think, like, don't quote me on this one, I might have got this one wrong, but I think the supplement begins for EVs in April, the same way as the tax begins. I don't think this year's cars will be charged the supplement at any point during the lifespan of the car. It's only 5 years anyway, so I think you'll be okay. I think it's people buying new cars now that will find that is added. My car, when I bought it in December 22, was 44,000. So yes, it would have been subject to the expensive car supplement, and it would have been subject to it going forward now had the decision not been made to allow it to stay at zero for cars that were bought in the past. So if this whole grandfather situation hadn't been considered, the legacy situation hadn't been considered. So I'm quite happy on that one. I don't mind paying my way. I have money to pay it. I can pay the 190 or the 195, whatever it becomes in the future. I don't mind paying my taxes. I pay my taxes on my income. I pay my taxes on VAT and so on. It seems reasonable that I therefore pay my tax on car like everybody else does. So I don't have a problem with paying the car tax. I'm glad I'm not paying the expensive supplement tax, because that is another chunk on top, that extra 400 just over, which would make the bill 600 a year, which I think that's quite expensive, and I may have decided differently if I had known that was going to be the case. I always expected that electric vehicles would eventually fall under the same tax umbrella as other vehicles anyway, so that hasn't come as a surprise. I think anybody who expected electric vehicles to be tax-free forever, probably a little bit naive, let's say. I was going to say deluded, but that's a bit harsh. Naive, that's a bit kinder, isn't it? So going forward from April, 40,000 is going to be the limit. Then you pay supplementary expensive car tax over that for all vehicles, including EVs. And that does change the market a little bit. So this is one of the things that's a little bit interesting to me. There are quite a few cars that are around that kind of 40,000 mark. Sure, you can buy yourself an EV for less than 40,000. It's not difficult. The new Dacia Spring's coming out and it's only going to be 15. That's way below. The Renault 5 is around 25, I think. You can buy the MG ZS. You can buy, there's a variety of cars, the new Hyundai Insta. You can buy the Kia EV3. There are a lot of cars that you can buy below that threshold. So yes, if you're buying a BMW or one of the Mercedes EQ series or an Audi e-tron, they're going to all be above that 40,000 mark. But there are cars that are below that 40,000 mark, and that is where it starts to get interesting, is those cars that are on the edge. So you can buy yourself a Tesla Model 3 for 39,995, I think it is, but just below the 40,000 mark. If you upgrade any options on that, I don't know what options are available, but if you have any options on that, you're going to take yourself over. So there's going to be a lot of white Tesla 3s driving around from the, for the next few years. Equally, Hyundai, on their Ioniq 5, you can buy the short range Ioniq 5, again with no options and in the lowest trim level, for just under 40,000. So that's this EGMP platform I have here, the one that rapidly charges, where you can get charge in 10-15 minutes. And it has a reasonably big battery, reasonable range. So it's a good distance cruiser, but only the short range one and only the lowest spec will be under 40. Anything else will be over 40 and you'll be in that big tax bracket again. So you have quite a few cars that are on the edge. If you add any options, you'll go over. You have quite a few cars that are just over as well. The Kia EV6, in the UK, the short range battery does not exist. It was never offered. So all of their Kia EV6s now start at, I think they start about 45 for the lowest spec car. And then obviously as you go up the range, then they're going to get more expensive. So we're looking at a situation where there are a lot of cars that you wouldn't consider to be a luxury brand, like Kia, Hyundai, Ford, Vauxhall, etc. that are going to be over that range. Now, as I mentioned, there's plenty of choice below. You can get yourself a Renault. I think there's some Vauxhalls. The Mocha, I think, is quite relatively inexpensive. There's the Citroens. The Citroen EC3, I believe, is quite a nice car. But quite a lot of these are slower charging and they're smaller range. So they're good for shorter distances, maybe not good for a company car driver or someone who's doing a lot of long journeys. Company car drivers, interesting. They probably don't pay their tax. Their company or the lease company or somebody pays their tax. So they don't see that value. They choose a car from a list. They go, okay, I'll have that one, because the lease price fits the value they're allowed to choose from, or something like that. Depends on what their company car policy is. That's what ours was when I had a company car. And then they put forward that and they receive that car, and that tax is paid along with everything else that's paid. Maybe obviously servicing, tyres, maybe they bundle in fuel, you can also do that. Various things, depreciation and so on, it's all covered in that lease price. So they won't see that value. However, they will then be probably returning that car and getting another one after, say, 3 years or 100,000 miles or whatever their policy or their lease deal is. At that point, that car comes back onto the market as a used car. It goes to the auctions, gets auctioned off. So the new car that had that expensive car supplement might just be a Kia EV6. It's going then into the used car market with still 3 years of expensive car supplements owing on it or due to be paid on it. So it's going to sit on the forecourt there. It's got 100,000 or more, maybe 120,000 miles on it. It's only 3 years old, so it's quite new. It's probably got all the gadgets because that's what it had at the beginning, which made it expensive. But it's sitting there now, likely to be picked up by a family because it's a big car, and they need to be aware that they're picking up a car that has a very high tax level, because otherwise when they come around to that renewal of the tax after a year and they get the letter through the post, this letter through the post, they're going to be looking at it and going, what? 600 baht? And then it's all going to go back in the news, isn't it? So we're going back in the news again that people are getting stung by this tax, and we're going to have headlines, and social media is going to be in a big Ferrari and so on. So I think there's two interesting things there. One is where the prices will sit with regard to models, because companies will be trying to get their car beneath that 40k for any private buyers. That's going to be important. But also in 3 years' time on the used car market, when people start picking up cheap bargains, or what they think is a cheap bargain that then has owing on it £600 a year for the next 3 years, which would be what, £1,800. So you could be paying £1,800 extra in tax over 3 years for a car that you thought was a real good bargain. And that will apply not only to EVs, that will apply to obviously petrol and diesel cars at around that 40k mark as well. I mean, it's not tricky. You can buy yourself a Volkswagen Golf, a petrol Volkswagen Golf, and go over 40,000 if you choose the right spec and add all the right extras. It's possible. It's not something that's it's not something that's applied to unachievable cars that the average person like me or you, well, I don't know you, maybe you, maybe not you, we'll have to see. Maybe you drive a Ferrari, but it's not just applied to cars beyond the reach of the normal man, which is the point I'm trying to make. So those are the interesting things. I hope you found this video interesting. If you have, then please like it. If you like me and my videos, then please subscribe. That really helps the channel. And of course, add any comments you want to add in the comments below, because we all love to have a good chat, we all love a good discussion, and I need to know what your thoughts are too. I'm giving you my thoughts, please give me yours back. So that is the end of the video. I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope I'll speak to you next time.